Should we start now? Since it's already 10:30 New York time, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who is joining us from around the world. Welcome to this first component of the new capacity building program that has been developed by the United Nations Academic Impact, which is an initiative that, as you know, or most of you know, aligns institutions of higher education with the goals and principles of the United Nations. And so it is a privilege for us to start this program today, outlining some very good best practices that has been carried out by institutions of higher education here in the United States, Carnegie Mellon University and the University of California, Davis. And of course, we have colleagues also from various departments, units, and offices of the United Nations, including our guest speaker from the Department of Economic and Social Affairs here at the UN Secretariat. So it is a privilege to have you all here. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce you Mr. Robert Skinner. He's the chief of the United Nations Academic Impact and also the deputy director for partnership and public engagements in the Outreach Division of the UN Department of Global Communications. Rob, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Omar, and thanks to everyone for being here. I'm really excited about the program we have in front of us today. At the end of 2021, as we're approaching some of our final activities and events for UN Academic Impact, I really want to thank the hubs, both the thematic hubs and the SDG hubs, for the ongoing, impressive, important work you've been doing to try and keep things moving within UN Academic Impact. It's been an interesting year, a lot of transition at UN Academic Impact here in New York, but the hubs have really maintained the momentum and the progress, so we appreciate all of the effort that you've put forth. I'd also like to thank our speakers today, who Omar will introduce as we move through the program. I think it's really exciting to have them all joining us from Carnegie Mellon, from the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and from the University of California at Davis. It's going to be a very interesting conversation, and I look forward to that. And of course, I thank all of you for joining us. We always know that you have busy schedules, that there are lots happening on your campuses and within your communities, and we appreciate everyone taking the time to be with us on a Wednesday morning here in New York, and in evenings, afternoons in other places around the world. But we're very excited today at the start of this new sort of program, this SDG Workshops program. It's an idea that we have to give all of our members across UNAI, the over 1,500 members across the world that are members of Academic Impact, to share their work with each other, to share your concepts and ideas and the things you're doing around UN issues, and in this case, particularly the Sustainable Development Goals, because what so many of you are doing is so interesting, important, and impactful. We want to make sure that the rest of the network is having an opportunity to hear about. And we really look forward to focusing on this more in 2022, and we'll welcome all of your feedback and ideas about the formats and topics we should cover going forward into the new year. As I said, you're all doing really innovative, important, impactful work, and we want to provide those opportunities for you to share those experiences with each other, so that they can be used as examples, for other members of the UN Academic Impact community. Everyone is approaching, sustainability in maybe with similar importance, but I think there are different opportunities and different ways in which, in methodologies, that different institutions are taking this on, and I think there are great lessons to be learned. As likely all of you know, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was adopted in 2015, included national government reporting on progress on the SDGs, what were known as the Voluntary National Reviews, or the VNRs. And every year, a subset of governments and UN member states reports back on the progress they've made against the SDGs, against the 2030 Agenda. And over the course of the last several years, and I think our participant, Alexandra from Carnegie Mellon, may talk about this a little bit as well, the city of New York sort of led an engagement around something called the Voluntary Local Reviews, which was an opportunity for cities, municipal, and local governments to report on how they were doing against the SDGs. And of course, the 2030 agenda also called on communities from all sectors to participate in the Sustainable Development Goals, which I think is why it is such an important and a different sort of agenda for the UN. Is it wasn't just focused on member states; it was focused on all sectors, private sector, local governments, and of course academia, which is why UNAI's engagement around these issues is so important. And so I've really just been learning about this as I moved over and became part of the UN Academic Impact team, that there are universities actually doing voluntary university reviews about how they and their communities are engaging in the SDGs and aligning operations with the SDGs. And in a conversation with the colleagues from the University of California, Davis, that are joining us today, I learned just how they were going about doing it. I said, well, wow, we really need to talk about this with the broader community so that others can implement this idea or take this idea forward, in whatever sort of form that they would see fit for their own, institution and their own community. So that's why we put this program together today and thought about, well, there are lots of other universities also doing interesting things, and that's why we've decided to make this a program of the UNAI to take these concepts and ideas forward, and as I said at the outset, to allow the sharing across the UNAI community. So I very much look forward to the conversation today. As I said, I think it's going to be really interesting, and I also look forward to the feedback from all of you about sort of the format we've set up, the topics we can tackle in 2022. Because as we go into 2022, it's really going to be a crucial year. We have to try and end 2021 on a positive note, of course, as we continue to try and tackle the COVID-19 pandemic and make progress on that, so we can return our focus to progress on the 2030 agenda, on the Sustainable Development Goals, recovering better, building back better, however one describes it. We need to do better to be able to achieve and make significant progress on the goals by 2030. I'd also like to take the opportunity to wish everyone, a happy holiday season and a happy new year going into 2022. Let's hope it's positive. I know we've all struggled as we've tried to figure out what to do in 2020 and 2021 as the pandemic has impacted all of our operations and it impacted, how all of you are teaching and learning on your campuses, how we're operating as the United Nations and trying to bring, personalized service and trying to have as much in-person interaction as we can, which is challenging. Folks can probably tell that we're still doing sort of hybrid meetings and workings from the United Nations. I'm sitting at home while Omar's in the office today. So we're all trying to get through that as we go into 2022. So back to you, Omar. Let's begin with the program. I think I've probably taken up enough time as we really dive into the conversation here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rob, for your remarks. And it is now my pleasure to introduce a colleague from the House, from the United Nations. I would like to introduce Ms. Mame Agieben. She is an Associate Sustainable Development Officer at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Prior to her current position, she worked as an Associate Economic Affairs Officer in the Trade Facilitation Unit of the Trade, Investment, and Innovation Division of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Previously, she served in the Sub-Regional Office of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in Zambia. And before joining the United Nations, she worked as a program coordinator for a civil society organization in Denmark specializing in refugee and migrant issues. Mame, it is really a pleasure. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Omar. Thank you for the introduction, and also thank you for the opportunity for the UN Academic Impact to give this presentation. I am going to be sharing my screen. I have a few slides just to make sure that they're visible, that everyone can see. Great. So I am going to be sharing, as Omar mentioned, some of the perspectives from the Voluntary National Reviews. I am an Associate Economic Affairs Officer in the Office of Intergovernmental Support and Coordination for the SDGs in UNDESA. And I'm also the focal point for the VNR. So I support and I guide countries through the preparations of their voluntary national reviews, through workshops, and also the actual presentations at the HLPF, the High Level Political Forum for Sustainable Development. So for my presentation, I thought I would just provide an overview of the voluntary national reviews, our process, some of the information and the background on that, and also then, so the second half, just look at some good practices on how we've seen academic institutions engage with the VNRs and SDG implementation. So that won't be an exhaustive list, but just some examples that I've pulled out to see on the different ways that academic institutions can be involved in the VNR process or in the SDG implementation. So I'm certain that most of the colleagues on this call are quite familiar with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and as was mentioned earlier, it was adopted in September 2015. So we think of the 2030 Agenda as this visionary roadmap for all countries and all stakeholders, developed and developing countries, to work towards more sustainable, prosperous future with social inclusion and equality, and also preserving our planet and leaving no one behind. So these are also embodying the 3 dimensions of sustainable development, so the economic, the social, and the environmental. And also for the VNRs, they are an essential part of the follow-up and the review of the 2030 Agenda, and they are presented at the high-level political forum for sustainable development, which takes place in July each year. And so some of the principles and the background of the VNRs is actually contained in the 2030 Agenda itself. You can see this in paragraphs 74 and 84 as well, specifically on the principles and some of the guiding thoughts. One of the founding principles is that the implementation and the follow-up of the 2030 Agenda should be participatory and inclusive, and include all stakeholders in society and all levels of government. And we have seen in the VNRs that I've been supporting, and also the processes that we've seen around the VNRs in terms of the major groups and the stakeholders and the different civil society organizations involved, that civil society and stakeholders of all kinds are very much involved in the process, in implementation, and also the monitoring and review. So this is actually very encouraging thing we've seen. So what types of stakeholders are involved? National government, it is a national-led process, but we can see stakeholders from all sorts of different sectors of society. Obviously, academia is also a key stakeholder engaged. We also ask countries to consider including Indigenous peoples groups, persons with disabilities, women, NGOs, philanthropic institutions. We've also seen national governments, local governments involved in VNR preparation and review of the 2030 Agenda. So stakeholders add this very dynamic and diverse element to the VNR process. So the principles of the voluntary national reviews are that they are voluntary. It is countries will express interest in presenting their progress to the president of ECOSOC, and then both developed and developing countries are encouraged to report. It is a state-led process, so it is country-driven. It's not, the UN is not the driver of the process. It's really a national process, and we really stress national ownership of the agenda. The VNRs are a platform for partnerships. It's a platform where different stakeholders from different sectors of society can be involved in the VNRs. And also the SDG implementation showcase what they're doing. And the VNRs are a learning experience. We focus very much on the countries should share their best practices, their successes, their challenges, some of the lessons learned in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, and also to very much focus on their national circumstances. What policies have they put in place? How are they domesticating the 2030 Agenda in their own country? So these are the key principles that we consider for the VNRs. And in terms of some of the benefits that we've seen or we consider is this sharing of lessons learned and best practices. The workshops that I run for the VNR, that I run in our that we run in DESA, really focus on these lessons learned and experiences to be shared, and so countries can learn from each other. Also, the measurement of SDG implementation and facilitating alignment to other frameworks. This is also a key element and a benefit. There are many ways of aligning the 2030 agenda to, for example, the Paris Agreement, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. So it's also about making sure that there's like harmonization across policies and different frameworks. It's to advance national implementation of the agenda, to mobilize partnerships, and to strengthen SDG awareness. I won't go too much into this, but we also provide guidance. The Office of Intergovernmental Support has also provided guidance on how to structure a VNR report, and this is some of the guidance included in the Secretary General's guidelines. And just that we also stress that we want all of the goals to be evaluated. And also now there's been a new element where we are asking countries to consider new and emerging challenges. For example, some of the reflections on the COVID-19 pandemic on the SDG implementation. So in terms of the countries that have conducted a VNR, this is a map of sort of the geographic distribution. To date, only 8 countries have not yet presented or expressed interest in presenting a VNR. So the VNRs are considered a success of the 2030 agenda implementation because there is active engagement by countries in order to present and share their progress, which is very encouraging to see each year countries wanting to present their progress. And I think it's a very dynamic and very rich amount of information and data and experiences that is available. So these are just some numbers. There are 247 VNRs that have been conducted to date. To date, 176 countries have presented their VNRs. 8 countries have not yet. So, and then this year, 46 countries will present. I mean, in 2022, 46 countries will present their VNRs. So I'll turn now to thinking about some of the good practices that we've seen and how academic institutions can engage in the SDGs. And I'll just quickly provide some examples. I won't go into too much detail on each, but I'm looking at stakeholder engagement, creating SDG awareness and education, the networks of academic institutions, including academic institutions in institutional arrangements, the support in the VNR preparations and SDG implementation, and also monitoring and evaluation. So as I mentioned, one of the key ways that academic institutions, we've seen them be engaged in SDG awareness raising and education. For example, Indonesia has had reported in its last VNR that it had appointed, had 11 universities appoint SDG campus ambassadors to promote and disseminate the SDGs and do public outreach. Sierra Leone mentioned that it has seen SDGs integrated into university study programs and into curricula, which is also an excellent way of disseminating and educating about the importance of the SDGs. In Kenya, they've also done an SDG forum, which is a platform for civil society, government, academia, private sector to engage and raise awareness of the SDGs implementation in the country. Several countries have also reported on the academic institution networks on SDGs that have been created in their country to support SDG implementation. In Norway, we saw that they have a national committee on the 2030 agenda and high level education, and this aims to share, experiences here and also to strengthen the role of universities in the 2030 agenda. The Dominican Republic reported that they have an academy for the 2030 agenda, also mobilizing government, the UN, universities towards the SDG implementation. In Austria, they have a project where 16 universities were strengthening cooperation in order to create a science society dialogue, which would then contribute to long-term sustainable development, which I thought was very interesting. And I think they have a website where they actually look at the working groups that they have and how this is all integrated into this framework. I think I just put a picture of their structure there. Malaysia also has an academic network which has inputs from academic institutions, think tanks, practitioners, and researchers on SDG progress. In Spain, they have a conference of rectors of Spanish institutions, which promotes SDGs within the universities, which is also some very interesting work. Also, another way is to integrate academic institutions into the institutional arrangements for the SDG implementation and also the voluntary national reviews. This is also a way of giving academic institutions a seat at the table and also harnessing really the information and knowledge and research available there. So in Georgia, they have a Sustainable Development Goals Interagency Council, and this also includes public sector, civil society, academia, and private sector in their working groups. Argentina has a platform for monitoring the 2030 agenda, which has more than 20 social organizations, trade unions, and academic institutions as part of that platform. Mexico has a body which is the highest level of decision-making on the SDG coordination, the National Council for 2030 Agenda. And here as well, we've seen, diverse groups of stakeholders involved, but also academic institutions involved in multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral groups. And in Cabo Verde, they have a local platform for localization of 2030 agenda, which brings together different municipalities, different levels of government and universities and private sectors to coordinate sustainable development processes. So in terms of how we've seen different countries use the VNR process to engage with academic institutions. Costa Rica whose process was facilitated by the Ministry of Finance and Central Bank and statistics organizations, also included academic institutions to develop scenarios to estimate program data in preparation for the National Development Plan. Finland included in their VNR presentation that they had in 2021. They included academic institutions in their presentation to show their contributions to SDG implementation in the country. Denmark included chapters which were drafted in collaboration with stakeholders from different sectors of society, including parliament, civil society, private sector, academic institutions, and different municipalities. Germany also included different written statements from different sectors of communities into their sustainable development strategy. And in North Macedonia, there was a call for academic institutions to submit SDG-related publications and research projects. So in terms of monitoring and evaluation, many countries have noted the importance and the crucial role that civil society, academic institutions play in the establishing a dialogue and also the implementation of the SDGs, and also in terms of providing innovations and being partners in projects. Certain countries have also specified the fact that these stakeholders also contribute to an effective oversight and monitoring of progress in the countries. And some countries have also specified that there's a particularly strong role that academic institutions can play in providing substantive analysis for the SDG implementation and also looking at the issues that are of national priority within the country. Also in Pakistan, it was mentioned that they are also actively engaging with universities in research and implementation on the SDGs, especially in monitoring and evaluation. So those were just an overview of some of the different ways that we've seen academic institutions support, contribute to the voluntary national reviews process and the sustainable development goal implementation. And so just in terms of just providing you with some information on the way forward in terms of the voluntary national reviews, in case you're interested in that process, in terms of how it functions, they will be presented during the high-level ministerial segment during the high-level political forum for sustainable development in 2022. And their countries submit their final reports, which will be available on our website. There will be a link to that. And also, there are several regional forums and that have open participation across the different regions that we have in Asia, Latin America, Europe, Africa, and also the Middle and Western Asia. Excuse me. Right. So just in case that, excuse me, these were just the countries that we're presenting in 2022 in case your country is there and you have a particular interest in following their VNR process. And then just to share with you some of the guidance that is available on our website for guidance on preparing a VNR, some of the synthesis reports which actually showcase what has been prepared within a VNR, some of the common reporting guidelines. So with that, I say thank you for giving me the time to share some of our work and also how academic institutions are engaging in the VNRs and the sustainable development implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mame, our colleague from the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, for your presentation. And I think a lot of universities would like to actually participate actively in the VNR process in their respective countries. And I'm very pleased that you not only outline the whole process of the voluntary national review, but also underline the different avenues in which academic institutions have participated already and can participate in the near future when it comes to this process. So we thank you very much. We kindly invite you to keep joining our event. I'm sure some questions might go into your direction once we reach the Q&A section. And on that note, I would like to remind all attendees that we will have the opportunity after we hear the presentations from our two invited universities to have an interactive discussion with the staff of the universities and to share best practices and ideas going forward. And now we turn the page to the voluntary university reviews. Now that we heard the original, if I may, voluntary national reviews, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Alexandra Hinnicker. She's an associate fellow for sustainability initiatives at Carnegie Mellon University, an institution of higher education here in the United States, where she's also responsible for the voluntary university review of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and related activities. Previously, she oversaw the SDG program at the Office of Foreign International Affairs of the City of New York, where she was instrumental in the creation of the concept of a voluntary local review. And before that, she was a representative of a non-governmental organization, PAX, to the United Nations, and worked as communications and advocacy officer for the United Nations Development Program in Cambodia. Alex, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Omar, and thanks to Mame for that really helpful overview of how universities are engaging globally. I learned a lot from that presentation, actually. So I'm going to try sharing my screen. I'm not super familiar with Microsoft Teams, so I ask for your patience. And I will start. I hope that you can see the CMU slide.
All good. All good.
Great. So first, a bit about Carnegie Mellon University, in case you're not familiar with us. We're a private, internationally ranked university. We have programs ranging from science, technology, and business to humanities, public policy, and the arts. We have about 14,000 students in 7 schools and colleges, and our education focuses on identifying and implementing real-world challenges and solutions, and we also focus on a cross-disciplinary approach. We have campuses around the world, including Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm based, and Washington, D.C., and Silicon Valley in the United States. We also have campuses in Rwanda, Qatar, and Australia. A bit more about the Sustainability Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University. So during the United Nations General Assembly in September 2019, there was a meeting co-sponsored by the United Foundations and the Brookings Institute, where the Carnegie Mellon University provost joined other leaders from universities in the Pittsburgh region, the mayor of Pittsburgh, and the head of the Pittsburgh Foundation to launch the Sustainability Initiative. What this did was it aligned our education, it was a commitment to align our education, research, and practice activities around the world with the global goals. And that included publishing the world's first voluntary university review in September 2020, which was modeled after the voluntary national reviews and also the voluntary local reviews, which is a concept, as mentioned, that I developed while at the City of New York, and now more than 300 cities and local governments are doing their own reviews. So as a university, we believe that we have a particular commitment to educate the next generation, to create knowledge, and to lead by example. So undertaking these efforts using the common language of the Sustainable Development Goals, we believe helps advance collective action to address this ambitious agenda. So while countries and cities around the world are using this agenda to identify challenges they face and engage in action to make our world more just and equitable, CMU's Voluntary University Review, we hope, sends a strong signal that universities are also a critical partner to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, to do this, he also established a steering committee that includes former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Sarah Mendelson, who heads up our campus in Washington, D.C. We have our university engineer, Steve Gunther, and the head of our civil and engineering department, Dave DeZombach. And they hired me. They actually recruited me from the City of New York, and I'm very happy to be here. They also established an advisory council of about 25 students, faculty, and staff that meet on a monthly basis and help guide our efforts. I want to recognize from the outset that these goals were agreed to by 193 countries, and if you've ever tried to agree to anything with 193 countries, you know it's very difficult. So we recognize that they're imperfect, but it's really wonderful that they provide this common framework that we can all use, whether we're a city, country, university, private sector, or individual. So we're encouraged to localize the global goals, and that's just what we're doing at the university. So I mentioned that we published our first voluntary university review in 2020, in September of 2020. That was a team effort that involved the steering committee, the advisory council, 7 students in a summer project course, and a couple of interns. The methodology consisted of investigating and making an inventory of current and recent education, research, and practice activities at CMU, and then manually mapping them to the various Sustainable Development Goals. And this was done through a combination of desk research and engagement with students, faculty, and staff. So in terms of desk research for education, we used, you'll see the N number, we used about 3,000 courses and from spring 2020, and we worked with this group of 7 students to manually map each course to one goal. For research, we used the beta version of a tool, Dimensions, which reviews research publications and analyzes the Sustainable Development Goals that they're related to. And for practice, we collected information about various practices and then again manually mapped them, saying which goal was related to which activity. At the same time, we conducted community engagement activities, which were, of course, thwarted by the pandemic, so we had to switch to an online mode. But these consisted of, first, in February 2020, sending out a knowledge, attitude, and practice survey to all of our students, faculty, and staff around the world to better understand what our community knew about the Sustainable Development Goals and how they were already engaging. We also had a public takeover of our university center in Pittsburgh, where we put up exhibits about the goals, and we had performances from students. I think in the previous slide I shared my favorite, which is an all-female, an all-women, euphonium quartet that, of course, addresses the importance of Goal 11 on preserving culture, Goal 5 on gender equity, and probably a few others. And then when we transitioned to the online mode in May of 2020, we ran a 17 rooms exercise, which included conducting 17 one-hour Zooms, one for each of the 17 goals, to bring together students, faculty, and staff to discuss what was already going on and to connect them. The goal was to obtain a snapshot in time, looking at recent activities and ongoing activities, and we didn't attempt and we don't claim to have captured every single activity, which is an impossible task no matter what methodology you develop. But it was really important to start this ongoing discussion and start connecting different people in the university using the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. We also work with the City of Pittsburgh and local organizations, which I can go into the question and answer section. But the findings from our 2020 Voluntary University Review helped inform our engagement activities for the following year. So we conducted a series of really detailed focus groups with students, faculty, and staff to understand how we could better engage with them. We also realized that we need to enhance our mapping beyond assigning just one activity to one goal to better understand the interdisciplinary nature of our education, research, and practice. And we also saw the need to make the information interactive rather than just having one static report with a couple of lines showing what we were doing on the various goals. So I also wanted to add that we really value the engagement with other universities, which is why I'm so glad that we're here today, that the United Nations is hosting this convening, and that there's so many universities around the world. Jolynn and Tom from UC Davis are wonderful partners, and I'm really excited to hear from them about how they've gone through their process, because it's been really valuable for us to work with them and other universities looking at these same goals. So now we move to 2021. So around the world, there are countless efforts to develop SDG keyword lists, automate SDG tagging, and so on, but we didn't identify any efforts that were totally open source, that were objective, that were scalable for the mapping that we wanted to do on an ongoing basis. So what we did was CMU has an amazing computer science school and also a lot of really strong data science students. So we worked in partnership with CMU students who have expertise in data analytics and developed a set of keywords based on existing sets and the Sustainable Development Goals, and an open source tool to conduct data analysis and do the SDG mapping that anyone can use and refine in collaboration with CMU. This is in line with Goal 17, Partnership for the Goals. We posted everything, including the keyword list, the open source coding, and other tools online with the intention for all of you to use, to download, to share input, to help us improve the process so that we can all do this a little bit better. Recognizing that tagging is just an initial step, and the conversations facilitated around the Sustainable Development Goals are just as important as mapping the goals themselves. We also created new interactive web pages for education, research, and practice, which I'm going to try to share with you on Microsoft Teams, to serve as a foundation for updating the Voluntary University Review and also internal and external engagement. Finally, and this is my favorite part, we hired 3 student interns to work over the summer 2021 and through the fall to work on data analytics, to work on our communications, and to conduct research to support these innovations in capturing how activities at CMU align with the global goals. This includes production of a short animated film, communications and outreach materials, the development of profiles of CMU community members who are using the Sustainable Development Goals, and the creation of the data analytics tools and visualizations I just shared. So for the education bit, what we did was we used the data analytics tool and analyzed 15,000 courses. We uploaded this information. We've made it available for professors as well as students to review and provide feedback to help us better understand our analysis. Our aim is for students to find courses that are related to goals that they're interested in, but they may not know about because they're part of a different college or school in our university. For research, I mentioned that last year in our 2020 Voluntary University Review, we used a beta version of a tool called Dimensions, but we noticed some inconsistencies in that tool, and we also didn't have there was no transparency around the criteria that they used. So what we did is we took our tool, we identified about 20 early adopters, we ran the tool, we had half-hour interviews with each of these early adopter professors to validate our findings and help improve them, to get feedback and so on. And we shared this information publicly with the aim that more professors will come and be interested and engage with this. We're also doing this with university libraries who are a key partner throughout all of our throughout all of our Sustainable Development Goal activities at CMU. Finally, in terms of practice, what we did was we collected all the practices, manually tagged them to each goal, and identified how they were related to multiple goals so that people could see how they could become involved in various activities related to the SDGs. And here's where I'm going to try and show, I'm going to try and share a tool, and then I will, can you see the Sdg chart that I'm sharing with you now?
Yes.
Okay, so what we did was we uploaded about 200 tools, 200 activities, excuse me, and tagged them with these goals, included the source website. So let's say you're a student or faculty and you're wondering what on earth the university is doing to help reduce inequalities. You can click on Goal 10, and all of the activities that we are conducting related to Goal 10 are listed in here. The Bias Busters program, Code of Business Ethics and Conduct, Community Fellows, Faculty Opportunity Funds. You can click on any of these areas and it will take you to the source website so you can directly connect with the person or party responsible for implementing that goal. And this is, regularly updated with feedback from the community. So these, as I mentioned, these web pages are serving as a foundation for our engagement both internally and externally. We're going to continue to report our activities and progress towards the SDGs through annual updates to our VUR, but we're going to continue to also refine the methods, incorporate feedback from the CMU community and also from everyone here to figure out how we can do the process better, with the aim that we can all work together to make this a more just and equitable world. And I'll just add in a plug for Goal 16 because it's my favorite, so that we can make the world more peaceful, just, and inclusive. So thanks again so much for the opportunity, and I really look forward to both hearing from UC Davis and answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Alex from Carnegie. As per the UN guidelines on the SDGs, December is actually having the Goal 16 as the goal of the month. So it's very timely and appropriate, your very last remark, and thank you for sharing the experience of Carnegie Mellon University doing the Voluntary University Review. Now we are going to hear about a similar experience that undertook the University of California, Davis, also in the United States. And for that, I have the pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Jolene Scholnicke. She's the Director of Global Engagements at the Office of Global Affairs of the University of California, Davis, which is a UNAI member institution here in the U.S. Prior to her current position, she was a fellow in the program of One Earth Future, focusing on women, peace and security research and policy. She also worked as an adjunct professor of national security and American defense at the California State University in Sacramento. And before that, she held positions, among others, at the International Civil Society Action Network, the U.S. Department of Defense, and the U.S. Department of State. And with her, we have Mr. Tom Rosen Molina. He's an analyst of the Office of Global Affairs of the University of California, Davis as well. Before his current position, he worked with the U.S. Department of State in Montenegro, dealing with human rights issues and the political grants program, and also in Germany as a political officer. Prior to this, he worked as a staff economist for the California Air Resources Board and as an economic analyst at the Agricultural Issues Center of the University of California. So Jolene and Tom, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Omar, the sound got cut off at the end, so we.
Whoa.
Tom is uploading the slides here.
I'm sorry, for some reason it's automatically cycling through them.
We're all struggling just a bit with Teams.
It works. I mean, it looks good on my end though, just a few seconds ago.
While Tom works on this, I can just start with a few comments. Introductory comments. Thank you so much, Omar, and thank you, Rob. Thank you to the whole UNAI team. I think This is a wonderful initiative, much needed. We need these venues to share practices and have conversation among the university sector on the SDGs. And as usual, I always learn a lot from Alex, and she mentioned we've all been in close contact through our VUR processes. And Mame, it was great to hear from you, learned a lot from that presentation as well. So Tom and I thought that we would just start like very briefly, because we have such a global audience here, with a little bit of information about our university, University of California, Davis. We call it UC Davis, is located in Northern California. It's part of the UC, University of California system throughout California with numerous campuses. That's part of that system. It is a land-grant university, a public research university. We have about 40,000 students enrolled. We have 4 colleges and 6 graduate and professional schools. And we are the most comprehensive university on the West Coast of the United States. And as you see, this slide has kind of a lot of little background facts, but we are also one of five public universities in the US with a breadth of expertise in the specific areas of human health, animal health, agriculture, and the environment.
And there are a number of reasons that motivated the UC Davis decision to do a voluntary university review. The first among those reasons is that the SDG agenda aligns with UC Davis strategic priorities, as well as with the university's land-grant mission to advance the public good. UC Davis also has a strong focus on environmental, social, and racial equity. And UC Davis has a history and university structure that reflects a tradition of interdisciplinary approaches. For example, more than 50% of graduate programs at UC Davis are organized as interdisciplinary graduate groups.
Thanks, Tom. So at UC Davis, we've been strengthening our engagement with the SDGs for the last several years. We actively participate in international networks that are focused on the SDGs, of course, including UNAI, SDSN, which many of you may be also part of, and University Global Coalition, to name a few. And we benefit enormously from our continuing conversations with partners in the US, like Carnegie Mellon with Alex, and around the world as well, which have really informed our SDG efforts. We've been trying to develop a number of new initiatives since 2018 to mainstream the SDGs into our global collaboration work. One of the unique features of our VUR process, our first VUR process, was really that it was driven by a campus partnership among 3 units on campus: Global Affairs, which Tom and I work for, the Office of Sustainability on campus, and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. And this was really a wonderful way to bring together our strengths and focus on the international, the environmental, and the diversity, equity, and inclusion domains on our campus. And so to start to support a holistic and integrated view about how the SDGs integrate with our campus priorities. So that was how we have approached it. And Tom, okay, great, he's on to the VUR objectives. So when we first started this process, our 3 offices came together and outlined 4 key objectives for why we wanted to do the VUR, this first VUR. The first was really to begin to measure our progress in addressing big challenges locally and globally, and really to demonstrate all the work that was going on across campus. The second was really to build awareness on our campus and start to inspire more involvement in these global goals. The third was to identify points of connection and common interests across campus. We really want to continue to support interdisciplinary efforts on global challenges. And so the process we hoped for the VUR as well as the product would support those connections. And then last but not least, to inform our SDG programs and initiatives with our collaborators, both on campus and externally.
Since this was UC Davis's initial VUR, our approach focused on documenting and categorizing existing efforts occurring across campus. This was important to provide a benchmark to track our progress. We focused on 4 pillars of work that are relevant in a university setting: research, teaching, service, and operations. In the front section of our VUR, the 3 offices weave together a narrative on the global, environmental, and diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects of our campus identity, and we connected the SDG framework with our own campus priorities. Our VUR also includes individual sections on each of the 17 SDGs. In these sections, we highlight the work of individual centers and we spotlight projects and initiatives that exemplify the work for each SDG. So the VUR was informed by a combination of desk research, meetings and events, surveys, and campus data that was already being collected by various offices. So the 4 pillars of SDG activities that I mentioned earlier, research, teaching, service, and operations, are depicted here with their associated data sources. The surveys were the most rich source of data in that they contained the most descriptive data and they came directly from the project or activity leader. We also mapped courses from the spring 2021 quarter to each of the 17 of the SDGs, and there's more information on how we did this contained in our VUR document. We also utilized data obtained from SciVal, a research metrics software, to supplement our evaluation of research as measured by publication output by SDG. So this slide just gives a short overview of some of the key findings of our report. I have to caveat this by saying that our VUR is not comprehensive and could not capture every SDG activity occurring at UC Davis. As a large research university, there's just a lot going on at UC Davis, and this is a first attempt to document those SDG related activities. So UC Davis staff, faculty, and students self-reported 2,583 SDG related activities occurring across 82 countries and every continent. Also, 50% of survey respondents indicated that their SDG relevant work took place within the United States. And this reinforces the notion that the SDG agenda is both local and global. So this slide also shows some of the top reported SDGs. And as you can see, SDG 3, good health and well-being, ranked number 1 at our school. And you can see a few of the other SDGs listed below that.
So we thought it would be helpful to just go through briefly our stages of our process that for the VUR. The VUR process for us took more than 12 months to complete. It was all done during the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course presented additional challenges. During stage 1, it was really a time when our 3 offices engaged in initial planning and we started to survey the landscape. We wanted to look at what was going on with university tracking and reporting on SDGs. So we kind of looked globally as well as nationally. We talked a lot with Alex and Carnegie Mellon and others. We were looking for potential models and methodologies that we could adapt or use for our own context. And we started to also look at what data was already available on our campus or was collected by other units on campus that might not necessarily be tagged to the SDGs, but that we could do the work of tagging it to the SDGs and apply it to the VUR. And then lastly, it was really important for us to establish formal sharing mechanisms among our 3 offices during COVID, when everything was remote, and all of the coordination that was going to need to occur over a period of months to keep the communication lines open among our office and really facilitate that co-creation of the VUR. So the second stage of our process was really about campus input and really trying to make sure that we got as much campus input from the stakeholders around our campus as possible. Of course, this was extremely challenging during COVID-19 with students, faculty, staff working remotely to get input. So we had to be somewhat creative, and we approached it in various ways. Together, our 3 offices planned formal events that were completely virtual called Sdg forums. And we also coincided this with informal calls and video calls that were open to those on our campus to come together and share their information and meet others who are committed to the Sdg agenda. And then, as Tom talked about, we had a survey that we distributed far and wide among campus that was open to not only faculty, but also staff and students. And we used all of our available communication channels among our 3 offices to get that out. We also had an undergraduate Sdg intern team that helped us plan a student engagement strategy, and really they acted as ambassadors in trying to reach out to students who were not on campus. And then we engaged in targeted outreach to our research centers and institutes around campus, personalized research, personalized outreach to try to get them their important input into the process. And we found that along the way, every stage of the process, it was really important to focus on our communication strategy and how we were going out to different segments of campus.
So stage 3 of our VUR process focused on data collection. And something we learned during this process was that it was valuable to circulate the surveys we constructed as early as possible so we could begin collecting data early in the process. As Jolyn mentioned, it was a long process, and we received responses to the survey over the course of many months. Something we also learned during this stage was that it was important to strike a balance between designing a very detailed survey that collects a lot of information and one that is very simple to fill out. The former will get you very few responses, but very detailed responses, while the latter will get you a lot of responses with not a lot of detail. So it's important to strike a balance between those 2 extremes. We also found it useful to compile the data as we received it, because this allowed us to become familiar with the data early on and allowed us to begin to think about how we would analyze it quantitatively and qualitatively. And looking at the data as it came in also helped us to make adjustments to the structure of the report based on what we are seeing coming in with the data. So a good example of what I mean with that is that as we saw the data coming in, we were able to see gaps in the data where our methods weren't collecting what we were hoping to collect. And because we were analyzing the data as it came in, we were able to supplement our existing methods with other methods to make sure we covered all the data gaps we needed to cover. So the next stage is focusing on analyzing and drafting. And during this stage, we began with reporting the summary statistics on each SDG before trying to interpret underlying trends. In doing so, we were trying to keep in mind that this was a benchmarking exercise. And so it was most important for us to document simply the number, the type, the source of activities occurring for each SDG. And as we were building the narrative from the data on each of the SDGs, we found it useful to stay nimble because we found areas where we needed to go back and do some additional information gathering, as I've alluded to before. And this was key to ensuring that the report did not leave out crucial expertise on specific issues and that there were no missing voices in the final product. Another thing we found valuable was that it was useful to balance the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of the report. We didn't want to just present the numbers or list of projects for each SDG. We wanted to make sure that the data became part of the overall narrative.
So this brings us to our last stage as we were getting ready to complete the report. We added an extra step. Once the individual SDG sections were completed, were drafted, we actually identified experts on campus, expert faculty members and administrative leaders who worked in each individual SDG, and we asked them to do substantive review of the chapters to make sure that we weren't missing something else going on at campus that was really important, to make sure the vocabulary was correct, and that the areas of prominence were adequately represented as non-experts in some of these issues. We wanted to be sure that that substantive review happened. And that was a really valuable step. It was not anticipated at the beginning of our process, but it was really important. It became really important towards the end, and we got a lot of really helpful input from that and incorporated that. And then the three offices basically went back after we had all 17 SDG sections written. We went back at the end and then worked on the introduction, key findings, and next steps for our campus. We didn't want to do that too early, prematurely. We wanted to see all 17 chapters before we started, as Tom said, looking at the cross-cutting or underlying trends and connecting it very closely to our campus priorities as well. And then we, worked together to incorporate various rounds of edits before we published the report, again, and had a communication strategy to think about how to get it back out to the different segments of campus.
So thank you for the opportunity to share our process. Jolene and I are looking forward to discussing more details during the discussion segment of this webinar, and our contact information is listed here. Please feel free to reach out and contact us.
Well, thank you very much to the University of California, David, to Jolene and Tom for their presentation. It has been a privilege to hear from you and also from Carnegie Mellon University. Before I turn to the Q&A session, I turn to Rob for his initial remarks after hearing the presentation from DESA and also the university.
No, thank you, Omar, and thanks to everyone. Those were amazing presentations. Mamie, Alex, Jolene, and Tom. And as I said in the chat, Alex, it's nice to see you again. I wasn't sure where you'd gone from New York City, but from Jolene, I became aware that you're at CMU. The one thing they say about being on these virtual meetings is it's hard to express your enthusiasm. You have to really move your hands around a lot and be very demonstrative. But I thought those presentations were all amazing, and I love what's happening in the chat, the connections being made in the chat, which I think is fantastic as well. And I think that's exactly what we were hoping for from UN Academic Impact, is that we can convene these sessions with this global audience, with our global membership, and ideas can be shared and exchanged and collaborations can be set up that you all take forward. We want to help kind of be the center of these conversations, but we don't need to be driving them and engaged in all of them. It's an opportunity for all of you to take ideas forward and work with each other around the world. And then we can come back and convene the group again and talk about what's happened. But I really think what Carnegie Mellon has done and what UC Davis has done are great examples to take forward. And I think it's probably spurred some thoughts and ideas from the folks on the call, and we'll make sure that the broader membership folks who weren't able to join this can participate as well. And I know from Meme's presentation, I learned a lot about what DESA is doing and how it's engaged with universities and things that are happening that I wasn't aware of. So I think it's been a great session, and I thanks to everybody. And I hope that, if we can take some questions in the chat and figure out how to, have the conversation continue, that'd be great with me. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rob. So we are transitioning now to the Q&A component of our workshop. So those of you who would like to present comments or questions to one of our speakers or to all our speakers, please feel free to do so through the chat box. In the meantime, I do have a couple of questions on my own, if I may. First, one is addressed to Mame. Regarding, she mentioned specific examples of engagement of Institute of Higher Education with the voluntary national reviews. So my question is this something that is somehow encouraged or promoted by DESA or the UN as a whole, or there's a specific mechanism in place for that to happen, or this is up to each country to decide the best way to do that?
Thank you very much for the question. So the VNRs are very much a national led process. So it would be within the governments to decide which kind of frameworks and councils that they establish nationally to facilitate the participation of stakeholders, especially academic institutions. But as in DESA, we do definitely encourage just a multi-stakeholder process. Also, the Division for Sustainable Development Goals actually works on stakeholder engagement plans, supporting countries in how to actually facilitate and develop, including more stakeholders, because we do think that that's a richer in our report and presentation, and the mobilization of all sectors of society is important. It's a whole of government, but also a whole of society approach. So it is a nationally led process, but we very much encourage that. Yes.
Thank you, Mami, for your presentation. And my question to the universities, actually, is the question divided in two. The first one is that both of you mentioned during your presentations, if I understood correctly, that you had to use at some point certain platforms, digital platforms and software to collect data and to conduct surveys and all. So I was hoping that my question was, first is what best practices on that could you share with the rest of the universities that might or might not have the same resources? And second, if these platforms are open source, so if they can be shared with other universities, or if there's a way to share them. So that will be my first question. And the second, which were the challenges that you faced during the process of doing these voluntary reviews? I don't know who wants to go first. Alex, perhaps if you want to go first.
Sure. Because we took a couple of different approaches. I first want to say that this was the most difficult part because, of course, you know, we had COVID, everyone was working remotely. Those were additional challenges. But one thing, frankly speaking, about the Sustainable Development Goals is they can be a challenge to communicate about. There are 17 of them. They cover so many issues. We have so many different people working on them. So our initial survey, the Knowledge, Attitude, and Practice survey that went out in February of 2020, got pretty good responses from faculty and staff, but less so from students. I think they just weren't familiar with the agenda. And this is also helpful information for us to have. And that informed some of our outreach activities that we did later. I mentioned the 17 rooms where we brought together the staff, faculty, and students as equals to talk to each other and share what they were doing. And then ultimately looking at the focus groups that I mentioned, where we had these really deep 1-hour conversations with a limited number of people in each room. So 8 undergraduate students, 8 graduate students, 8 faculty, or 8 staff, to better understand what their specific community's needs and understandings are related to the Sustainable Development Goals. So now when we do this outreach, we know that we have to use these aren't shocking things. We use Instagram when we're talking to students. We use email when we're talking to faculty. How do we identify existing mechanisms within the university to tap into conversations so that we can both educate them about the Sustainable Development Goals and our commitments and what's going on? And the challenge, I think, really was, again, for students who, you know, they were thrown into this online environment. They're not on campus. A lot of the typical areas where we would engage, like student organizations, just weren't as active because people weren't gathering in central places. So it's been really helpful to have the student interns just remind us. I don't know how many, oh, I feel so old saying this, but to hear from the young people about what actually works, because I don't know, I'm not sure what they're interested in. So like just making sure that they're driving those conversations is something that's been helpful. But still, I think that everyone, after this online environment, there are benefits, but it's also exhausting. So we're just finding ways to make those personal connections that aren't more surveys and more questionnaires that people are less and less motivated to respond to. And one other thing we do is we talk to other universities. Jolynn also connected me with someone from the University of Tennessee, and they shared some of their survey language, because it's hard to think about how we want to frame this in a way that's that people want to respond to. So seeing what's been successful at UC Davis, at University of Tennessee, and other universities around the world helps us think about how we might be able to frame this in a way that's interesting for faculty and staff to respond to, and students.
I can jump in for UC Davis. We'll kind of reverse your question, Omar, and build on what Alex said about the challenges. First, we also, I mean, we have talked a lot among UC Davis and Carnegie Mellon about the shared, very similar challenges, as well as in our conversations with other universities. A few of the big ones for us were, when we started the process, it was wonderful that Carnegie Mellon had already published the first VUR. And it actually influenced our thinking about doing one. So we were inspired by that we could do it. But there aren't models. We don't have guidance. We are, we also looked at voluntary national reviews and voluntary local reviews. But each university really has to decide for themselves how to construct this in a way that's feasible. So that is a little bit overwhelming when you're starting and you just don't have a lot of models to look at, and you're kind of coming at, what do you have already? So you have to kind of come at it multiple directions to try to figure out what your plan is going to be and what your structure is going to be and your methodology. And then, as Alex said too, I mean, it was very challenging during COVID-19, and we are now that students and faculty and staff are back in person. We are really focusing on student engagement as well, because just like Alex said, the student clubs and organizations were not active. And so, we just had to, try to reach out through our students and so forth. But yeah, it was challenging for the remote, and the stress that people were under, certainly as well. And then, one other one for us was just, we had 3 offices co-creating this, and each office, it's been very valuable, but each office has their own other priorities and their own things that are important to them. So, it took a lot of internal coordination, and we couldn't pop over to each other's offices in person. We had to arrange Zoom calls. So everything became, a lot of scheduling and so forth. And then Tom had a few more, and I think he can probably address also, Omar, the research side and how we dealt with documenting that.
Thanks, Sterling. So just 2 interrelated points. So one is that it was a challenge to document just all the activities going on a campus due to the sheer size and breadth of what's going on a university campus. It's not, as Alex mentioned before, it's not possible to capture every single activity that's occurring on a university campus. And it's frankly, we can't even know everything that's going on unless it's reported somehow by the activity leaders to us. We could try and go out and find information on everything, but some of it's going to remain hidden until they come to us and reveal what they're doing. And a related challenge is just data limitations. We tried to use various sources to capture every facet of work that's occurring on campus, whether it's research, teaching, service, or operations, and all of these 4 pillars depend on different sources of information to compile. And then a fundamental issue that's very hard to address is what constitutes an SDG activity? When is the activity starting and when is it ending? What do you define as the boundaries of that activity? If it continues to go on year after year, every year, is that a new activity? And how many SDGs are involved in any given activity? So it's very difficult to define these things. To a large extent, we had to rely on self-reporting. We had to rely on faculty and staff coming to us to tell us what they defined as an activity and what they defined as the related SDGs. So it's a very difficult area to navigate, and guidance would be useful, but I think every university kind of has to just approach it their own way.
Thank you all for your responses. I do have some questions that has been written in the chat box. First one is, how would you define the purpose of the SDGs, and how can an individual researcher can work with you in their implementation? I don't know who wants to take that. Who would like to take that question, which is a fundamental question, actually, which is the actual purpose of the SDGs. Seems very clear and obvious, but probably it's not, because we focus so much on the targets and the indicators that we might lose track of what's the actual importance behind the 2030 agenda as a whole. I don't know, Mame, if you will be willing to reply to that.
Sure. I think that's the fundamental question. I think the 2030 agenda and the SDGs are considered this sort of vision of a more prosperous world that we would like, in terms of, and across those elements, like, economic prosperity, social inclusion and equity, and also environmental sustainability. And then also a way where it's for all the countries in the world, developed and developing, to work towards that common objective in all sectors and levels of society. So we do see national, we see local, and it's really encouraging. I think also my supervisor was also very encouraged by the idea of university reviews, because this means that the agenda really is getting into every segment of society and hopefully transformative in that way. But yeah, in terms of the purpose, I think that's the agenda. I'm sure others have views as well.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, let's move to the other questions. Alex, I have a couple of questions for you. One is, how willing students and staff, I think you actually addressed this already, but how students and staff were willing to participate in the surveys and interviews, and how was that encouraged? And the second question that was addressed to you relates to the methodology that you at Carnegie Mellon University to do the mapping that you referred to.
Sure. I took a lot of lessons learned from my experience managing New York City's program, which is that you have to meet people where they are in terms of what they're doing. So approaching them with this big, complicated framework of 17 goals, they're very interesting, and maybe people care about them a lot. They're not sure where to begin. I'm not sure where to begin sometimes when I look at it. It's so broad reaching that it feels overwhelming. So it's really helpful to find a few, let's say, we call them early adopters at CMU, people who are interested in this agenda, work with them to identify how what they're doing is related to the different goals and highlight that work to encourage other people to do something similar, with the objective, going back to that question about the purpose of the SDGs, is to better connect and lift up ongoing activities related to the goals, and maybe identify new opportunities for different parts of the university or external collaborators to work together. I mentioned a little bit at the beginning that we work closely with the city of Pittsburgh, who have conducted a voluntary local review with leadership from a CMU student. And also I'm part of a regional network of non-governmental organizations, city officials, county officials, to look at how regionally we can use the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals to better understand what we're doing on all these different issues, how we can create a narrative, measure it, and talk about it, called the Discover Network, which I'm happy to put a link to in the chat.
Thank you, Alex. Actually, somebody asked about the presentations that all the speakers made today, just to confirm to all attendees. That we will be sharing with all of you the slides that were shown during the course of this workshop, in addition to the YouTube recording that is going to be available on our YouTube channel within the next few hours or days, in addition to a recap article that will be published most likely by the end of next week on our website as well. I have a question now for Jolene and Tom. Somebody in chat asked, is it possible to create a platform for dialogue on the SDGs implementation in higher education? He's referring to a specific region of the world, but I think this question might apply pretty much everywhere. So a platform for dialogue on SDGs implementation in universities. Which are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can begin to address it if Tom, Alex add to this. I mean, I think what's important is that a number of structures are already in place. Like UNAI, we're here today, but I would, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel there. I think that we have a number of networks that are focused on the SDGs globally now that are open to universities to join. We also have various venues within higher education where we regularly get together. Universities get together on their sustainability practices. Universities get together that are focused on internationalization best practices. All of these arenas offer a lot of opportunities to discuss and share and bring the full SDG, the full framework to those audiences for more engagement. So I don't think we necessarily need to create more platforms. I just think we need to use what we have and have more dialogues. And it's just very rewarding once, and Alex, I think, has mentioned this as well in this workshop. The relationships are so important. I mean, we do want to focus on the data, certainly, but at the same time, really, these kinds of movements, the kind of change we want to see from the SDGs relies on champions. It relies on people doing things differently. And I think that, having informal dialogues combined with formal opportunities for the dialogues, all those combinations are just so valuable. I mean, for UC Davis, I can't even imagine us being here today and have completed this VUR without those conversations and that kind of mentoring that goes on with those relationships, both inside our institutions and outside, because I've learned so much from colleagues inside our institution, have different expertise that comes into this. So I don't know, Tom, Alex, if you have other thoughts on platforms.
Thanks, Jerlyn. I thought you said it greatly. I'm not going to add anything to that. That was a great summary.
I mean, I just always, I'll agree with Jolynn, but one thing I want to add, and I'm glad you mentioned this, Rob, is that it's really helpful to have platforms where we as universities get to define the agenda rather than having a preset agenda that we're supposed to meet or whatever. So I appreciate that you made that comment, Rob, that this is a space for us as universities to connect and share what works with insight and input from United Nations experts.
Alex, on that.
Omar, apologies. I just wanted to jump in on a couple of these apologies. But yeah, thanks, Alex. And that's precisely, as I said, what we're trying to do. And I think, to the question on, setting up a regional platform, and I appreciate the question on the Caribbean, a region that's sort of near and dear to my heart personally. And I think what we'd like to do is bring more universities, institutes of higher education into these conversations within UNAI, but also, as Jolynn said, with possibly regional platforms that already exist, and take the SDGs to those platforms if they're not engaging on the SDGs, and provide some sort of opportunity for the dialogue to come there. And then I also think as these different, whether it's regional gatherings, subject matter groupings or whatever, bring those conversations into UNAI, because there are lots of conversations happening around them. The thing that I think that makes UNAI distinct is we do have access to the UN experts. And in some cases, it could become interesting bringing some of the UN, the member states, the governments to some of these conversations. So there's actually interaction or connection between the UNAI membership and all of you. I also wanted to make a comment on something interesting that I thought that Alex said that I think is something we struggle with. And it also goes back to the question on, what are the SDGs? It's language, and figuring out how young people are talking about these issues, because we know they're thinking about these issues and working on these issues and taking action on these issues. They just don't know what the SDGs are, or haven't been taught about them or learned about them. And I think that's what's so great about what UC Davis is doing, what CMU is doing, and what so many others are doing that are here in this call today, is trying to figure out how to get more people involved and engaged, and particularly young people. This is what it's all about them, the world they're going to live in. And that, we're trying to improve, and that's the SDGs provide that common framework and narrative for us all to think about these various issues, protecting the planet, making the world more equitable, providing greater opportunity for all, leaving no one behind, all this language the UN has used for years. But the truth is, we don't know if that's resonated with young people, and it doesn't really seem to have resonated with young people. So we need all of you, please help us figure out how young people are talking about this. And it just, kind of, the light bulb went off in my head when Alex, you said that. It's like you're figuring out the language to use to get them engaged, to meet them where they are, which I forget who said that, but that's exactly what we need to do to make this agenda applicable so people understand it, but then actually achieve it so people know they can engage in it. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rob. I do have a final question. So how do we face the challenges to get involved with government, public, private, and industrial linkages, as well as community engagement in the context of collaboration and partnerships on SDGs? And before giving the floor to the universities and to Mame to respond to that, so your final remarks, UNAI is actually, in consideration of the fact that universities and colleges are actually the conveners, and so they attract the potential and they harness the expertise and knowledge of a number of the stakeholders. So we believe, and I believe personally, that universities are very well placed to actually overcome such challenges, which of course we cannot deny their existence. But I'm confident, and we are confident, that universities actually have all these human and potential and resources in terms of the teaching, research, extension programs, and so on, in order to face these difficulties as they happen. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Mame.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I would say that I think that the challenges that faced in engaging are universal for many different types of stakeholders. I think what is encouraging, I think governments are opening up more. Well, there's a trend that governments are, in the VNRs we've seen, are including more stakeholders and have a stakeholder engagement plan. I would say that it really is about perhaps if it's a local in terms of government, looking at what networks and what institutional arrangements exist in your country to engage in that way. That's from our perspective at DESA, that would be our main avenue to see what government's doing. Especially if you're a particular country, maybe review the past VNR reports that countries have done, see what frameworks exist, what civil society organizations are already engaged in that country, and look at the avenues there. And some countries have next steps if they have frameworks that are already in place that they've identified, to see how to engage with those. That would be my guidance on how to find entry points into supporting your country in their VNR process and in SDG implementation.
Thank you very much, Mame. Alex?
Sure. One thing that I find really useful is, like I mentioned, taking an existing project that's already happening that you think represents the Sustainable Development Goals, looking at all the different partners, seeing how it maps to the Sustainable Development Goals, and bringing them together so that they see how their work is relevant to this framework. So it's already happening. The SDGs are already being implemented on different levels. So like, find some of those projects that have different stakeholders involved and show them how they're already doing it. And that will open up their eyes to potential future collaborations and ways to use the Sustainable Development Goals. And I just add that universities are best placed to sort of, like you mentioned, Mame, hold some of these conversations, because we are educating students, we're conducting research, we're implementing the practices that are related to the goals. So it's this cross-cutting sort of areas of SDG practice that I think can be helpful in thinking this through.
Thank you, Alex. Last but not least, Jolene and Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything that has been said, and I think that there's just so many opportunities for the universities to add value to these discussions and this agenda. One thing, I mean, to the question about the challenges with these different stakeholders, one thing with universities is they already have. This is very in line with what Alex was saying. They already have so many partnerships in place because we have to do collaboration to do research. We have to have international collaboration increasingly on teaching. We have to have all these collaborations anyway to do the business of educating and researching. So there's a lot of partnerships and relationships already in place with other higher education institutions, but also often with research institutes, with government, et cetera, private sector. And so really, I think mainstreaming the agenda into some of those existing partnerships where they're not necessarily using this vocabulary. Like Rob said, they're not necessarily using this framework or aware of it. But once we kind of explain and put that in there, you're already doing it. Like Alex said, here's how, and it gives them another tool and framework to work with as they're pursuing deepening that work. So I think there is a lot of existing partnerships that can really be leveraged. It's just time consuming. And that's where we have to have more champions across the universities who can aid in doing that mainstreaming work. And then, of course, the other side is we're always pursuing new partnerships at universities and new collaborations. This is a huge part of what our office, Global Affairs, does. And so we always put the SDG agenda, the SDGs, as a central talking point in any of the conversations we have with potential new partners now, because it sort of sets that right away, and we're finding all kinds of potential partners that then say, oh, we're also committed and we're doing this, and maybe we can work together. So it kind of just speeds up that collaboration process around issues that we can work on together. So those are just some thoughts building on what has been said.
Tom, you would like to take the floor?
I think Jolene put it in a good way, and I think it's a good point to end on. So nothing more for me. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And before giving the floor to Rob, it is a personal privilege and my appreciation and gratitude to all the speakers for their participation and attendees. And certainly this is an example how UNAI is fostering global academic cooperation. Precisely this is a very concrete example again of how this can actually be pursued in order to achieve the SDGs. And with that, I give the floor to Rob.
Yeah, thanks again, Omar, and thanks, Mamie, Alex, Jolene, and Tom for your participation today. The conversation has been fantastic. Thanks to everyone for the great questions and the conversation and engagement in the chat. That's been really interesting and super encouraging to watch as we try and figure out how to take these collaborations ahead further and use the platforms that exist. I think we're really excited about being that connective tissue to the United Nations for universities, on which universities can act on the issues that matter to all of you. And we're looking forward to really taking this forward in 2022 with these kinds of dialogues. So again, thanks to everybody. I know that most of you on your campuses are probably pretty busy as we're coming to the close of 2021. And I'll end it there. But I hope that everyone has a good end of 2021 and that we can make progress in 2022. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.